Welcome back to Saab Stories. On this channel we've mostly covered the drivers and their cars, but when it comes to Saab as a brand, we know that's not the full picture. So let's introduce you to the first episode of SquawkBox, where we step inside the world of Saab aircraft, with stories told by the people who flew them, sharing their first-hand experiences with the machines that shaped modern aviation. These are Saab stories from the sky, so strap in and get ready for takeoff. Hi guys, thanks so much for joining us today on Saab Stories. Would you please introduce yourselves to me, please?
Hi, I'm Matt Teller. I'm a professional airline pilot. I got started in aviation during college and ended up flying the mighty Saab 340 back in the late aughts, early 2010s with an American regional airline. I'm
not an airline pilot anymore. I work in the private charter world for a company called Wheels Up. I'm the director of operations. And I flew the Saab 340 for a couple of different carriers, American Eagle Airlines, and then again at Seabourn Airlines in the Caribbean. Had a great time doing it. I'll say that much.
What sort of aircraft is the 340?
It was one of the earlier generations of the glass cockpit twin turboprop regional airliners, 34-seater, so fairly modest in size, but decent with fuel efficiency. It was good for what it was at the time. It's had pretty unbelievable staying power in the industry, as it is still out there flying around. And Nevil, I think you probably know a little bit more about how it's still being used down in the Caribbean and Florida and areas like that.
Yeah, largely phased out. You see some moving into the cargo space even, and maybe you see a few of those. A lot of Alaska operators used them. You know, that short haul segment, while the airplane is efficient, it also gets a little bit dogged above, what would you say, Teller, 16,000, 18,000?
Yep. 16 is pushing it.
Yeah, if you're there at a mid-level range altitude, that airplane, that's where it's at its peak performance, because that's what it was designed for. It's a short haul, 34 seats, right? It's that regional model airplane delivered with high impact, high efficiency, and I would say an ergonomic cockpit once you understand it. Designed by engineers first and pilots later is kind of what you come to understand about that airframe.
And that's, Peter, I wanted to say 3 letters to Nevil and see what kind of an emotional reaction I could get from him. Okay. Nevil, HMU.
I can't. I won't. I refuse. CTOT. I got one for you. CTOT.
CTOT. That's a good one. So,
okay,
Peter. So the HMU, and I went back and I found all of my notes and my company flight manual and everything. And this was my hand-drawn notes of the HMU, also known as the hydromechanical unit. And this was what controlled the engine and the propeller system. And we had to understand the inner workings of it and all of the various inputs and outputs. And it is a box of pure magic. And nice. I was really, really struggling to understand the HMU. The engines on the Saab 340 are the same as the Army uses on some of their helicopters, just mounted on their side.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's the GE CT7 engines. And I got lucky that I was going into the Saab as a captain. One of the brand new hire first officers who was in my systems class had been a crew chief on the helicopters that had the CT7s. And so he sat us all down and drew out the HMU, and it was about a 4-hour-long class just trying to wrap our head around how does the fuel get into the engine. It is such a convoluted design.
Well, and I had the advantage of Teller and I both come from a teaching institution. In the old days of aviation, pilots were required to basically build the aircraft with their mind, be able to visualize and see. Now, this airplane has 34 electrical buses. So for an aircraft, and it's your first type rating generally, this would have replaced the Jetstream models. So you're looking at a 12 to 18 seat regional turboprop with not a lot of capability. This was coming in and replacing it. So you might be getting your first type rating in a large aircraft. And now I have to memorize what's on all 34 electrical buses. Not just 4 or 5. There are 34 electrical buses. And so in an initial class, you have a lot to memorize. But then as aviation training has progressed, if you can't touch it, feel it, or smell it from the cockpit, then you don't need to know about it. So it's now a little bit easier. But for its time, probably one of the most challenging airframes to gain type rating.
It was very unique in its design, especially, Nevil mentioned the electrical system, which is convoluted at best. And so we'd be given this to start with, which had all the buses printed on it. But the part of the oral examination that you had to take to get your check ride was they would slide you the blank diagram and you had to fill it in correctly.
Oh my goodness.
It was only a couple of electrical buses short of requiring a flight engineer, which would be a third pilot in the cockpit monitoring all the systems. They managed to cut down on it just enough that it didn't require a flight engineer, but it's the electrical system. Nevil had mentioned CTOT, which is constant torque on takeoff. That's another one of those just black boxes of magic stuck under the floor somewhere that makes sure your engines make constant and symmetric torque on takeoff. Don't ask me to explain how it worked beyond that.
What happens if they don't?
You're exploring the edges of the runway at very high speeds.
Have you had any scary or risky moments with these aircraft?
The Saab has definitely taught me a lot more about declaring an emergency than any of the other airplanes that I flew.
Okay.
2 catastrophic engine failures where the engine actually lost parts out the back, and I had...
Hopefully not on the same flight, because you only got 2 engines.
Yes, yeah, no, they were different flights. And I had another one where we were trying to do a circling approach in the middle of the West Virginia mountains in the middle of a blizzard, and we had the engine and all of the downstream ductwork catch on fire, which was exciting. Gosh,
I got lucky. I must have worked for a better airline.
That's not setting the bar very high.
It's tricky because you're dealing with an airplane where when you're in flight, the engines and the propeller controls are mechanical, just mechanical. Cables, and I mean, you take apart the cowling of those engines and there's cables running everywhere, and it gets very confusing because even the engine it's a jet engine, but it's in there backwards. It's put, rather than the thrust coming out the back, which on this airplane, what would you gain? 10, 15 horsepower by the thrust coming out of the tailpipe?
Something like that, yeah.
The reverse thrust of the jet engine is driven towards the front of the airplane to turn the propeller. So all that is happening mechanically via throttle levers and prop levers. But as you touch down, then the electrical side kicks in, and now everything becomes governed. So if everything's not set up right and you touch down, she'll want to yaw left or right really hard. And then, so now imagine you're taking this airplane into rural areas that are more challenging. A 737 is not getting in there, right? They're never going to send them. And in my case, it was the island of Dominica. So I'm based out of San Juan, Puerto Rico. We're flying down the island chain, British Virgin Islands, American Virgin Islands, all throughout the Caribbean island chain. So you're coming into this island of Dominica, and it's basically a one-way in, one-way out. You follow this mountain valley through the jungle, and then you aim towards the third highest mountain peak. You do this hard left turn into a valley. You follow a river through this valley, and then you're going to make another hard left turn. And then about the time you go wings level again, you should be touching the runway.
Oh, goodness. That's right.
Then the end of the runway ends at the edge of the water, at the ocean, at the Atlantic Ocean. And if you're not ready for that electrical, mechanical aspect of the engines to grab, as soon as the aircraft has the weight on its wheels, it might yaw left or right. And so even on the ground, it had its own unique set of challenges. You knew an airplane well enough after the first 2 or 3 days of flying it, which way it was going to yaw when it touched the ground. So that was an added element of excitement that you didn't have to pay for on the Saab 340.
And Neville, you and I probably had different call-outs because we came from different companies. But if we touched down and I yelled "idle, stop, fail," what would you say?
Blue light special. Or if in my case, I don't know about you, but in my case, I just had some really, really nice soft landings on that, and I knew I did a good job on a landing if I got the blue light special.
Yeah. So
what's a blue light special?
It has this crazy, like Neville was saying, it has this crazy electrical system. Then once you touch down in flight, the engines will not, I should say the propellers will not go all the way back to idle or to a flat pitch. Because if they do, the airplane has a nasty tendency of stopping flying. And so they have...
Oh, just a little thing.
They have this electrical idle stop system that stops the blades at a slightly shallower angle so that you don't have quite as much drag on the airplane. When you touch down, a solenoid is supposed to retract the idle stop system. If you touch down nice and lightly, though, or if the idle stop system fails, there's a blue light down on the center console that comes on to tell you that the idle stop has failed, and there's a manual override that the non-flying pilot has to pull up on. But if one side fails and the other side doesn't, like Neville was saying, you end up with this asymmetric drag where one set of blades is perfectly flat into the wind and the other side is at flight idle. And things get pretty exciting. So it was a call out, and for us at Colgan Air, the airline that I flew for, the non-flying pilot always had to be watching for the blue light special, and you had to call out idle stop fail, and then the other guy would scream idle stop pull, and hopefully you were able to override it and regain control. I left the airline that flew Saabs back in 2011, and I went and flew charter for a while. And then Neville and I worked together for Flight Safety International doing instruction. And then we both left and went to a company called Gamma Aviation, a British company, that later became Wheels Up. I left Wheels Up in 2018 and joined FedEx. So I've been flying cargo now for the last, just started my 8th year, actually.
The same size aircraft, or do you fly bigger things now?
Much bigger things now. Yeah, I started out on the Airbus A300, and now I'm on the Boeing 757.
It's funny, in our current story arc that Teller and I have, it's funny how after you fly the Saab 340, you kind of become a turboprop guy. So we both gravitated. After we left flying Saabs, the first thing I did was get a job flying a different turboprop, the King Air 350, which is the program that we taught in together at Flight Safety International. In the United States, Gamma Aviation was the biggest operator in the world of the King Air 350. So when we left Flight Safety International, we wanted to go be with Gamma Aviation, which was contracted to provide service to Wheels Up. And Wheels Up is a nationwide charter service. It's Pier 135, and it's a membership base with an expansion into charter. They focused very heavily on the King Air 350, which spoke to me personally because I wanted to remain a turboprop guy. But Teller left. Our other group of friends, there was 5 of us, known as the Flight Safety 5. They have all gone on to bigger and greater things, and I'm the only one who hung around and was stupid enough to get suckered into management. Spent a few years serving as a chief pilot, and now I'm the director of operations, where I really pretty much fly a desk.
Oh, that's a shame. Is that a shame?
I keep currency and qualification on the Citation 10, which as a Saab driver I can appreciate because it's an overly complicated aircraft, but it's also very fast.
Which the Saab is not.
Yeah.
So the whole link with the car side of things, any similarities?
I have owned 2 Saabs.
Okay.
I owned a 9993. The hatchback, and then I I'm embarrassed to say it here. I did own a GM Saab.
Hey, that's me. I've got one of those.
Okay, right. And actually, sitting here in our operations center, and there's a Swedish gentleman, a friend of mine here, and he's showing me. I was telling him I might be joining you guys, and he was showing me a picture of his GM 95 Aero, beautiful car. The one thing you feel as a pilot when you sit down in the at least in the older version, I have access to that weather band radio. I'm used to having weather at the touch of a button in a cockpit. I can always tune to a frequency and get current weather. And that weather band, at least in the U.S. Saabs that I had, my first Saab, the 9.3, I could pull up weather broadcast radio. And the way that the instrument cluster and the panel is, there is a aviation theme to that, right?
The slightly wrap around everything just there.
Yeah, ergonomic. The aircraft designed by engineers. You're like, well, why is this there? Okay, do this to any Saab pilot. They'll know exactly what you mean. This you get the claw hand to start the engines. It was like on Matt 7.5, it's a button and he lifts a lever, right? But on the Saab 340, it was a 4-fingered twist just to start one engine.
Oh, right.
So,
and then you have to cross over.
Yeah, because you now have to lift the fuel condition lever out. So the crossover, from my perspective, I had my first Saab car before I flew my first Saab airplane, and not knowing as much as I do now, I was drawn to the Saab automobile because it seemed like a pilot kind of car, and they're obviously a little bit quirky. They're a blast to drive. Oh, and by the way, it's turbocharged. Yeah. And I'm just like, how is any of this bad? And I that was the moment when I went to an airline that operated Saabs. I'm like, I have to fly that airplane. There's no way I'm not flying that airplane. Yeah.
And the airplane always comes across as over-engineered, a little bit unusual, but anybody who has ever flown it will make fun of it. But if somebody who has not flown it makes fun of it, we're going to fight you.
Yes.
This sounds exactly the same.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was always a little bit of an us versus them. At the airline that I worked for, we had 3 different airplanes, and the Saabs were always kind of made fun of and spoken about in hushed tones, but anybody who ever flew it remembers it well and is very, very fond of their time on that aircraft.
Similar to the car ownership group, right? I mean, you can sit around and talk shop with other people who have owned Saabs. The person who used to sit in my chair as director of operations lived in Manhattan, had several 900 convertibles, loved them, and we would end up talking about Saabs more often than we would talk about airplanes, which was our job. But similar when you run into other pilots out there, and you find out that somebody else flew the Saab, they're your buddy. Whether you like him or not, that's your guy now, right? Yeah. And same thing in the car the attitude of the car owners. It's funny. I mean, it just inspires a certain level of endearment.
I've never owned one. I had one as a rental. It was the tail end of high school for me.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, this was some time ago. I remember the first time I got in it. I mean, first of all, just figuring out where the key went was a little bit baffling.
You're like, hold on.
Well, I think I left a few marks on the back of the steering column before I realized that there's no keyhole.
Scratching around.
But it was a lovely car and the fact that I still remember driving it now this many years later. I loved it. And I've always lusted after them, seeing them on the road, just never had the opportunity to own one personally. Probably one of the weirdest days that I had was the blizzard that I had mentioned. We were going into Beckley, West Virginia, which is the middle of absolutely nowhere. It was the middle of the night. We were running 4 or 5 hours late. It was our 6th leg of the day, and we just wanted to get to the hotel. Beckley, at the time, only had an ILS, or the precision approach system, only went one direction at the airport, and that was not the direction that was favored by the wind. And in airplanes, you always want to land into the wind. We had to shoot the approach and then do what's called a circle to land, where you have to get down below the clouds and essentially circle around to the far side of the airport to land. In doing that, you have to maintain visual contact, which means staying really, really close to the bottom side of the clouds and really, really close to the top side of the trees.
Oh, goodness. That's tight. Yeah, that's tight.
It was middle of winter. It was a blizzard. The Saab is somewhat underpowered. So when you start running your ice protection systems, it robs power from the engine to protect the airframe and the engines themselves from icing. Okay. And so you notice the degradation in performance. So we're coming in on the approach, and right about the time we break out, right as we're getting the runway in sight, again, remembering we're facing 180 degrees from where we're going to be landing, we get what's called the triple chime. So it's this ding, 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 which is the worst of all the alerts that you can get in the cockpit. It's called the master warning.
Oh, right.
And I'm the pilot flying, so the autopilot is off at this point because I'm just starting the circle. And my first officer calls out for me, tailpipe hot. The Saab, because of the way the engines are oriented, the exhaust stack actually goes over the top of your wing.
Right.
And the wing is where you store all your fuel. And so you want to know if things are getting too hot back there.
Yeah.
There are, inside the tailpipe, there are 3 sensors that detect for overtemp situations. Unfortunately, with the Saab, if those sensors get wet, they have a tendency to trigger the alarm. And so a lot of the time, and what our procedure actually said was, if you get that tailpipe hot, you reduce the power on that engine, see if the light goes out. So we're down very close to the ground. We're in a blizzard, so we figure it might just be moisture. So I pull the power back on that engine. Light extinguishes. Okay, great. Continue on. So I start to roll the power back up on the engine. Ding, 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 tailpipe hot.
Okay, so that means it's genuinely good?
It's starting to look more genuine.
Okay.
So we're just breaking off on the circle maneuver, so we're turning away from the airport to give ourselves some space to maneuver. The light has come back on. I start to crack the power back just a little bit, but I don't want to get slow in icing conditions. I can't get the light to go out. I tell my first officer, open up the checklist, start reading the items, but we're not shutting down the engine. We're just going to land it. The runway's right there. So he starts working his way through the checklist as I'm maneuvering the aircraft. The light is on, and we get ding, ding, ding again, followed very closely by a bell. And Nevil knows what that bell means. The bell means that your engine's on fire now. It's called the fire bell. And it's an actual klaxon bell that sits up on the wall, and the fire lights come on. And so ordinarily when the engine fire lights come on, you go through the memory items where you reduce power, and then you pull what's called the firewall fuel valve, which cuts off fuel, air, electrics, and I think hydraulic. Well, no, not hydraulics, because it has a really weird hydraulic system.
Just
but again,
we're stop it in its tracks, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to shut the engine down. But the idea being it isolates the fire, and then we have fire extinguishers out there in the engines that we can use to put the fire out, hopefully. But again, the runway's right there. We're in icing conditions. We're already slow and low, so I tell my FO, hold off on the bottle, just shut the engine down and see what happens, because that at least gives us the option of restarting the engine. Right as he's reaching up for the fire handle, I've started to pull the power back to start the descent. It's a descending left turn for the runway.
Right.
And all the lights extinguish. Everything goes back to normal.
Oh.
And so he kind of freezes his hand right up there by the fire handle, and we kind of look over at each other. We say, all right, we're just going to continue. I start making the left turn. We go to our final configuration, and as soon as the flaps get fully extended, we get triple chime, single chime, and a fire bell.
Everything goes off.
Everything goes off. We get tailpipe hot, we get left engine fire, and we get the left duct overtemp, which means that now not only is it the engine that's on fire, it's the ductwork coming in off of it that comes through the wing.
Wow.
And so this is right about the time we're rolling in on very short final, about a mile from the runway. And so as soon as I roll wings level, I tell him shut it down. He goes through the drill, secures the engine, we land. I'm just able to make the turn off, and actually that's it, we're done. We do the emergency shutdown procedure, secure both engines, secure the electrical system, blow the fire bottles into the engine, and we're calling for a bus to come get the passengers down by the runway. We both kind of slump back in our seats, and he looks over at me and he says, "You mean to tell me we haven't been in the simulator for the last 25 minutes?"
When you did all your post checks and stuff like that, was there genuinely an issue with the engine, or was it all just electrics playing up?
It was all just electrics playing up. They found some possible evidence of overheating in the ductwork, but I think that was just for the paperwork.
I've got a treat for you guys.
Oh,
so he got to tell a story. So if we're doing show and tell, may I share my screen?
Go for it. Yeah.
This is the approach in the British Virgin Island Tortola.
Excellent.
I was new to this operator, but I had been operating in the Caribbean for several years. And so I was taking all the new captains out. So you come in over the city. There's all sorts of oral alerts going off for terrain, which is not ideal. But that's the only way to get into the island. And then as you roll out here, it's not a very long runway. And so this shows you some of while it's not a high-performing aircraft, it's very agile, very forgiving. You come in, you dive down through this canyon, you make this hard left turn, and then you line up on this runway, and you're landing at Rhode Island. And normally what you see over here on the right side, it's a really grainy video from a long time ago, back when we didn't have very good cell phones. But over on the right side of the field there is normally where you would see Sir Richard Branson's aircraft parked. This might be a blue light special teller. I'm not sure. Hang on. No, we touched down pretty hard on that one.
Yeah, that looks like it was an assured touchdown. Yeah, I think forgiving was a good word. I mean, you could really beat up on this airplane, and it just didn't seem to care.
I hate to do this, gentlemen. I've got a hard out at top of the hour here, so I really have appreciated this. Peter, thank you so much for allowing me to geek out for a little while. But I've got to get back to work. I appreciate you both. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for sparing a bit of your day with us. I really appreciate it.
You're in good hands with Mr. Teller.
Thank you very much, Neville.
I hand it to you, Professor.
See you, Neville.
What's the one thing that stuck with you since flying that plane?
Honestly, I always think back on those days and just think about the fun that we had. Part of that was the crews that we were working with and the people who were involved. We all had a passion for what we were doing and for the aircraft that we were flying, but a lot of it had to do with the airplane itself. The Saab was and remains so unique in the industry. There's nothing else out there that looks like it, that flies like it, that's built like it, designed like it. It's really a one-of-a-kind aircraft, and just the fun that we had, the fondness that we all developed for such a otherwise quirky little airplane. It's really stuck. This many years later, we all still think back very fondly on the limited time we had with that aircraft.
And would you say you wouldn't be able to say that necessarily with other things you've flown?
Asking a pilot to pick their favorite airplane is like asking them to pick their favorite child. But the Saab is definitely one of the more unique ones that I've ever been involved with, and probably one of the ones that comes up most often in conversation. They all have their pluses and minuses, some more than others, but the Saab is definitely one that has left a lasting mark.
Well, thanks so much for sharing some of your stories with us. I really do appreciate it. For both of you, I'm sure our audiences are going to love this. So thanks so much for taking a bit of time to talk with us today. It's been amazing.
Been my pleasure.